So this is a photograph of me that you can see in the background. It was taken over a decade ago when I had just entered graduate school in Australia. I believe that stuffed koala is still sitting outside Taronga Zoo in Sydney, so if any of you visit, go take a picture. So I had a fabulous time in Australia. I learned a lot. I graduated at the top of my class and won 2 academic awards for my thesis. Yes, thank you. I was a bit of a geek. But as a graduate student in Australia, one of the things that struck me very deeply and has stayed with me over a decade later is something that I want to talk about today. It was this practice at any formal ceremony of starting the proceedings by acknowledging the local Aboriginal people. In the case of the Australian National University in Canberra, where I was studying public policy, this was the Ngunnawal people, whose role as the traditional custodians of the land upon which the university's main campus has been built was acknowledged, often with great pomp and ceremony, and great care was taken to acknowledge and respect their elders, both past and present. The first time I witnessed this ceremony, honestly, my mind was blown. I was amazed. I loved it. I thought, what a beautiful way to acknowledge. I spent more time in the country. I became quite aware of the grave injustices and significant biases that Aboriginal people in Australia face today. And then this practice suddenly began to give me pause. So at graduations and other celebrations, I would look uneasily at other students, people of color, and wonder, am I the only one who is appalled by the tokenism of this? Has this symbolic gesture now become so overdone as to lose all meaning altogether? So years later, as I stand here today, I can admit that I am very embarrassed by my naivety and also my great inability to see how strongly my response to these ceremonies was linked to my own privilege. Thanks to a childhood spent as a third culture expat kid growing up in the Middle East or in urban elite spaces in Pakistan, I really could not see why this ceremony could have such great meaning because it was just symbolic. So it was 2008. I had just returned from Australia, and the then Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, delivered his famous apology speech. I don't know if many of you remember it, but this was the speech in which he acknowledged the suffering that Aboriginal people had faced for decades and accepted that there had been mistreatment. This speech also talked about the stolen generation. These were the children of Indigenous people who had been separated from their families as part of a concerted policy of forced child removal and assimilation. It was, and to me still is, one of the most defining moments of modern Australian history. And yes, it was symbolic, but it was extremely important symbolism. And I could finally see this. So what had changed in the short time that I had come back to Pakistan? And I think I figured out what it was. When I returned to Pakistan, a graduate, I joined the workforce, I was finally an adult. I was also firmly and securely ensconced back into my position of class, power, and privilege. And it was only when that happened that I was able to see things with new eyes. Because I think it is important that we all realize that language has power, and there is deep importance in letting people know that they are seen, they are heard, and that their traditions and beliefs have value and matter. And I see parallels in our own culture. The national anthem being played in cinemas before a movie in a country where everyone bemoans the lack of national pride. The recitation, often very ceremonially, of the Holy Quran at the start of formal events, when so much about how religion is taught and practiced in our country today is deeply warped. All symbolic gestures, but all considered important in the local context, and for some people with deeply emotive value. And I remembered this when I met an old fisherman. I was briefly working as part of a documentary filmmaking crew. I was with the IUCN, which is a nature conservation organization at the time, and we were trying to film the impact of drought and low water reservoirs in Lower Sindh. This is several years ago, and it was happening at a time where there was a lot of new oil and gas development in the Kirthar region. So I will never forget what this old man said to me and how much pain he said it with. He said, "वो अपनी बड़ी बड़ी गाड़ियों में आते हैं, हम उन्हें नज़र ही नहीं आते, वो हमारी आंखों में धूल उड़ा के चले जाते हैं. So I don't want to get into the politics of that specific development work, as the issues are very complex, and it's probably a talk for another time. But I just want you to focus on what he said. They never saw him. And I recognized quickly that much of my reaction to what was happening in Australia at the time had come from fear and guilt that came from my own privilege. I was used to power and authority in the context of my own life, and when it didn't come as easily as a brown Muslim woman in college, I began to see tokenism where there was a genuine attempt to make amends. Because for me, finally, it had become personal. People, even well-meaning, kind, lovely people, many of whom I went on to become friends with, would ask me if my then fiancé had a beard and a gun and would shoot me for talking to other men. And what did my father and brother really think about me being at university so far from home? Didn't they oppose my coming? And this is my favorite question, and I'm sure many of us get that here today. It's like, how do you speak such good English? So my response today, which is much honed, is because we were very, very well colonized by the British. But a decade ago, I was still at graduate school, still too young and too polite to say anything like that, and I would always launch into a complex explanation of my convent schooling and travel and privilege. And while I know that some of this is just ignorance and curiosity, but in the context of my short time in Australia, I was not always privileged compared to my white professors, compared to the white diplomats who studied in class with me, and the Aboriginal Tent Embassy was a constant reminder to me of how much still needed to be done. And because of that, the Aboriginal ceremonies began to seem like empty appeasements. So my mother is one of the pioneers of the micro-enterprise movement in Pakistan. And thanks to her work in the 80s and 90s, we got to travel to a lot of part of Pakistan that people don't generally visit. And as a result of that, we spent a lot of time with other children from backgrounds that we would not have interacted with had we just stayed in Karachi. So my siblings and I made friends wherever we went, and many of these summer friendships with local kids involved mutual obsessions like farm animals. But even though at that young age I could see that I had it better, it didn't make an ounce of a difference. And I think that is where the problem lies. If you cannot see and recognize your own power and privilege, you can't really talk about it. You can't really understand it. As a woman, and I think there are many women in the audience today, most of us understand this a little bit better than men when people talk about gender biases and feminism. And if we don't, we should. Living in Pakistan, we definitely know what it means to belong to a certain class and what it means not to belong. But we don't really see the role that we play in perpetuating all of this, right? So in certain educated elite spaces in Pakistan, such as coincidentally the one here tonight, it is very easy to talk about these issues in a philosophical and academic way. But we do not want to discuss them in the context of our daily lives. Not really. But it is critical that people like you and I, in positions of power and privilege, show respect and honor those who don't enjoy the same status as us. That we show them that their skills, their knowledge, their traditions, their culture matter. Because just as a gentle reminder, all our privilege and any power that we get because of it is completely and utterly unearned. So I have worked for many years now in what is called the social development, or more popularly, the NGO sector in Pakistan, and obviously my experience has only sharpened this awareness. I have done a lot of work in economic empowerment projects, and I have seen firsthand what it means to be a micro-entrepreneur, what it means to be truly poor, what it means to be incredibly talented and skilled, and yet uneducated, and what it means if you are all of these things, but also a woman. And I have begun to understand some of the challenges and frustrations. So this, my work, has helped me and my business partner, Angela, who's sitting here tonight. For us, one of the biggest frustrations was the gap in the market, which is there's a huge demand in the sort of modern contemporary market for beautiful handmade artisanal goods. people in the rural areas are extremely talented and can make them, but these products are not easily available. And we felt that this was something that we could address, and we got hit by the startup bug and started Polly and Other Stories, which is our social enterprise. We knew when we started that we wanted to have a very strong focus on people who are poor and who struggle to make ends meet, but obviously we also wanted to showcase the very best of Pakistan. So when we caught the startup bug and started Polly and Other Stories, one of the things that has always seemed very odd to me about this sector is the fact that all of us here, we're from a country where craft forms 15% of the livelihood sources for people, right? And while we celebrate craft, we like to document it and put it in museums, take photographs, and make a beautiful coffee table books. We don't actually care about the living artisans who make them. So many people depend on those skills to feed their family, and their future is completely uncertain. For me, these skills are our cultural capital. And it is incredibly unfair that people with such incredible skills should have trouble feeding their family despite their hard work. So we knew when we started we wanted to work on the development of local brands. We wanted to support local small entrepreneurs, particularly women, and especially those that work with traditional producers, and women and youth businesses. And we have not strayed from these core values in the 3 years that we have been in operation. And while we love how beautiful our store in Y Block DHA looks, and how gorgeous and stunning all the products on our website are, we will first and foremost always be a shop with a purpose. Because I know that I didn't become an entrepreneur to get rich. I mean, if I do one day, it's definitely a bonus and entirely well-deserved, but it's not what drives me. And it is through the pursuit of my aspirations that I hope to find meaning in my life and promote well-being and meaning in others. Because being passionate about what you do is something that I strongly believe in, and being able to help others is something that I really want to do. So putting the two together for me was a no-brainer. I sometimes call Polly and Other Stories the brand from the future because it feels like Pakistan hasn't quite caught up yet. We're not really ready for a gentler, slower future where knowledge and power is shared, where craft and handmade is valued, and we do not obsess over mass-produced junk, where people get to choose their pace of work and are paid fair wages. Globally, the rising interest in social entrepreneurship and the concept of a triple bottom line is changing what it means to be successful in life and in business. And with Polly and Other Stories, we hope to revolutionize how people perceive craft, interact with makers, and change the narrative around artisan and handmade in Pakistan. Because nothing means anything if we do not live a life that is of use to others. Every day that I work and travel and meet new people, I only learn one thing: how fortunate I am, and how none of that really had anything to do with me. I have met such incredible women and men who can make such beautiful things in small towns, villages, and kachi abadis across Pakistan. And yet, these people who have so much more talent than me, they work so much harder than me, they make so much less. They could probably do a much better talk than me here today, but here I am, and no one knows who they are. I don't know why it is this way, and I don't know why I have what I do and why they don't. But I do know one thing, that I will do everything I can to help them, to show the world their incredible skills, and in the end, to lead a life with purpose. Because that is one choice that I can make. More than the circumstances of my birth, it is this choice to see people, to hear them, to give them voice and true value that will truly define who I am. Thank you.